Hello guys, I'm gonna talk about navigation bars. Okay, now a navigation bar is something that's I think fundamental to your web pages. Okay, uh, I think also the header and the footer, which you've started to see. I think um, every web page in a website has the header at the top, followed by the nav bar, content, and then footer. That seems to be kind of like standard web page, and I'll just kind of show you that here. Okay, so if I go into almost like any website, well, maybe not Moodle's not a good example, but here, for example, even your email, right on the top here, there's navigation to like various things. Up here, navigation. Maybe I should open up something else. Let's see. Let's go to the Ferrari homepage. Okay. So if you go into any homepage, what you will probably see, there it is, right? There is your navigation, which gives you links to all the different places that you can go in your website. Okay. This navigation happens to be incorporated in their header, right? This whole thing, including their logo, is part of their header. Okay, so some people put the navigation inside their header, some people have it separate, okay, which is what we're going to do. There's a couple examples in your book. For example, this is from chapter 12, so the Starbuzz from chapter 12, and they implement a navigation bar here. You can see the header, navigation bar, content, and then footer down here. Okay, the one that we are working on up to now has been this one, the Starbuzz here, and I started putting what is the beginning of a navigation bar here, and I'll show you what the code looks like. So here's the code here in this section. As you can see, I've made a div. Okay, so looking at the other divs, oh, I see some indentation. Oh, no, that's right. Okay, so there's the div of our header, right? Everything was in that container, if you recall that container making that big white thing. And here's our header. Okay, and after the header, I want to put a navigation bar. So I've used another div, right? A division, a box essentially, okay, where I'm going to put navigation. So I've given an ID and I've called it nav. You can call it nav bar, navigation, whatever you like, okay? What's important is to distinguish it from the other distinguish it from the other divs, sorry. And essentially, navigation is essentially just a list of links, okay? Now, I mentioned lists before. We can have two types of lists. We can have ordered lists and unordered lists. So unordered lists would be the bullet point list, right? Ordered list would be the 1, 2, 3, 4. And we have UL unordered, and you can see that they just end up being bullet points there, okay? And inside your unordered list, each item is a list item, LI, okay? And each of these list items contains a link. It's just a dummy link. I don't link to anywhere, but just to kind of show you, right? Link 1, link 2, and link 3. And you saw what that was like. So I'm going to make some styling now. And the first thing I want to do is I want to make it a different color. Right now, it's just in that white section. Let's make a background color, and so let's make it some sort of brown color. Okay, so let's go into our CSS here, and let's go ahead and style our navigation. Okay, and so the first thing I said was the background color, and we were going to make that brown. Okay, save and reload, and there's our background color. That's pretty ugly brown, but oh, that's a terrible brown. I wish I had a better color, but okay. I won't waste your time. You can play around with the different colors. Some hexadecimal code is going to be a lot better, but maybe I will use that. What are these colors here? Let's use the same color as the footer. Background color, there we go. C, Control V. Okay, Yes, a much nicer brown. Okay, next thing I want to do is I want to actually style the links themselves. So this list, like we said, this is an unordered list. And I don't want it to be up and down. I want it to be, you know, in line. Okay, if you recall, list items are blocked, so that means they take up the entire row. They each take a line, so these are block, and they each take their own row. But I want to make them inline. Another thing I want to do is I want to take off these dots. Okay, so let's first take off the dots. So let's style the unordered list and list style type none. Okay, and reload, and you can see that. And we said each list item was taking up its own line, so they're block, and I don't want them to be block. I want them to be inline, so I'll display inline. Okay, I'm gonna have a little bit of padding too. Padding. Let's put top and bottom 5 pixel. Left right we'll put 10 pixel. Okay, and reload, and you can see now they're inline and they have that little bit of spacing in between them. Okay, now there's a lot of other tricks you can do to style your navigation. I'm sure you guys are going to be doing a lot of this. So before I go into more of the styling stuff, I want to mention something. Now I've styled unordered lists and list items. Now the problem with this is if I have any other unordered lists in my page, this CSS, this list style type none, is going to affect all of my unordered lists, and I may not want that. Okay, same with here. All my list items are going to be in line. So if I have other lists on my page, they're all going to be in line. That might be a problem. So what I'm going to do is, if you recall, I'm going to specify that only unordered lists inside the nav are going to have this, and only list items inside the nav are going to have this. Okay, so that's pretty important, just to make sure that I don't run into problems later on with my other lists. Okay, so having said that, let's take a look at chapter 12 and the page that they made. So chapter 12 looks a little bit different than what we have, and they've made their navigation bar like this. Okay, they have these capital letters, and they have highlighted the current page. Okay, and I just want to look at the code and explain some of that. So they have their code here. This is chapter 12. Okay, if you want to grab that and play with it, you can. And the first thing I want to point your attention to is they use some HTML5. Okay, and I won't go too far into HTML5 right now. I'll talk about that in a different lesson. But just to mention that divs in HTML5, a lot of divs have been made into like their own elements. So instead of div ID header, HTML5 actually has an element called header. Same with nav. They have an element dedicated to navigation bars, and they have sections. They also have a footer element. So if you want to do HTML5, it is a little bit cleaner, just because you don't have div this, div that, div. You don't have 2 bazillion divs. Things actually are a little bit cleaner and more meaningful, right? Instead of div ID nav, they just use nav. Okay, and then you can style a nav. Okay, so just so you know. Anyways, their navigation bar starts very similar to mine, right? An unordered list with list items. Okay, and notice that their current page uses this class selected, and that's what makes that highlighted. Okay, and when you go to a different page, right, let's say I'm in the inventions page, they'll take that class selected, and instead of having it here, they'll put class selected on there for the class for the inventions link, and that'll make that highlighted instead of that one. So you're just kind of moving this class to whichever link on whichever page. Okay, let's talk a little bit about their CSS. So as you can see, their navigation bar, they instead of hashtag nav, they just use the element nav, right? They're not using divs, they're using straight up the element called nav. So they're just styling it that way. Background colors and margin. And you can see here they did the same thing as we did, right? Unordered links, list style type none. Okay, list item style inline. Okay, so very similar. So do take a look at that. And this is not the only way to make a navigation bar. Okay, I'm including another resource from the W3 schools that is really excellent, that shows many ways to make navigation bars. So please do look at that resource. This initial example that I showed you with from the textbook kind of gives you an introduction for it, kind of lets you understand the concepts behind it. But when you start getting into your own custom navigation bars, they might look quite a bit different than these ones that they have in the textbook, and you may want different possibilities, drop-down menus, different types of floating or whatever. The W3 schools does go into a lot of detail into that, so make sure you look at that resource.